Good evening and welcome to the Metropolitan Republican Club's webinar series. My name is Ian Walsh-Riley, president of the Met Club, and on behalf of our board, we're excited to have you join us. As a reminder, we have a donation link in the live chat. We hope that you will consider making a contribution to help support the club so we can continue to bring you content-driven events such as this. And now to introduce tonight's great guest, my colleague, Kelly Lynn.
Thanks, Ian. Tonight, we are happy to introduce criminal justice reform advocate Alice Marie Johnson. In 1996, after a series of tragic events that led Alice down a dark path, she was convicted for her involvement in a Memphis drug trafficking organization and sentenced to life imprisonment. While in prison, she became a certified hospice worker, an ordained minister, and exhibited model behavior. This led the staff of her federal penitentiary to write letters on her behalf supporting a bid for clemency, which was ultimately rejected by Barack Obama. In late May of 2018, Kim Kardashian met with President Donald J. Trump at the White House to appeal on Alice's behalf. By June 2018, in an act that shocked the liberal left, Alice's sentence was commuted and she was released. On February 5th, 2019, as a guest of President Trump, Alice was recognized at the State of the Union address, and at the 2020 Republican National Convention, she was a primetime speaker. Since her pardon by President Trump, she has become an advocate for criminal justice reform. So thank you so much, Alice, for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me here tonight. What an honor.
Thank you. So our first question discusses the fact that April is Second Chance Month. What do you think are the most important initiatives in criminal justice reform happening right now?
Well, the most important thing right now is reintegration, is bringing people back into society who pose absolutely no risk, and to make sure that companies are on board to give them that second chance by giving them hiring opportunities. I think that is one of the most important things, because it's hard work to get them home, but then when they come home, they need the best opportunities for success.
That's a great answer. I'd like to turn to talking to you about if you could tell us a little more about receiving the clemency from President Trump in 2018 and later the pardon, and also your collaboration with Kim Kardashian and Ivanka Trump, and how did that moment come about?
Well, that was a moment that, if you knew, it would take me a while tonight to go into all of the backstory, but I'll tell you some of it. And by the time that you hear of these events, you will know that this was literally a miracle, my release from prison. Moment, please.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I would say that it was orchestrated by God, my release. As you know, I was sentenced to life plus 25 years as a first-time nonviolent offender. I was originally offered 3 to 5 years, but I chose to exercise my Sixth Amendment rights and go to trial, not knowing about the conspiracy law, that I would be charged with everything, every element, anything anyone else did, anything anyone said. That is the nature of conspiracy. But I made a decision when I went in that I was not going to give up my hope, nor was I going to give up my faith in God that one day that I would be returning home to my family. So the things that I was able to accomplish in prison has really been called extraordinary. I did more than even being a hospice volunteer. I coordinated Olympics for women who had special needs, mental and physical challenges. I wrote plays. I got the women in prison involved. I know that my going through prison made a difference in the lives of so many others. But when video visitation came into the prison, I was allowed to speak at New York University, the University of Washington in Seattle, YouTube, Google, and it was at one of these speaking events from prison that someone saw me, heard me speak, and asked me to do a video op-ed. Well, this video op-ed went viral, and it caught the attention of Kim Kardashian West. She said that she had not been on Twitter for days, and she turned her phone on that day, and my face popped up. She'd be the first one to tell you that she didn't find me, I found her. But I think we found each other. She contacted Ivanka and shared my story with her, and Ivanka shared it with Jared. They were able to pull my files and see the very injustice of my case. And she was advocating for my release. Jared and Ivanka, in fact, Kim hired attorneys. She brought attorneys in from across the country, from Texas, uh, New York, Los Angeles, and Memphis. They all convened and they called themselves Team Alice. And when Ivanka and Jared got on board, they said that they were now a member of Team Alice. So it was a huge effort for them to for them to fight for me to gain my freedom because I had been denied 3 times, even though I had exemplary conduct in prison. And as you said in the introduction, not only my warden had written letters, but the captain, staff members had written letters pleading for my release previously. Also, the women who I was doing time with, they started pleading for my release too, because many of them said that their lives would have been totally different if I had not embraced them and really got them involved in just showing that they had value even in prison. And so they wanted to see me out too. And that in itself is amazing for women who are incarcerated to start fighting for another incarcerated person. It just shows you that the magnitude of the influence that God allowed me to have in that prison. And it took 7 months, but that Kim got an audience with the president on my birthday. And I'll never forget what Kim said to me. She told me how the president asked questions about my case and how he was moved by it after the layers were pulled back as to what actually took place in my case. He had compassion upon me, and she said she felt that it was a great meeting. And 7 days later, President Trump signed my commutation for me to be released from prison after serving nearly 22 years behind bars. And literally the whole world watched my release, and my face put a face on the need for criminal justice reform. When I left that prison, you have no idea of what took place that day. The women were in every single window because they were locked down. They were beating on the bars and screaming my name, telling me how much they loved me. And that was a 1,600 person institution.
Wow.
And they were begging me, Miss Alice, don't forget about us. And I have not forgotten about them. I not only ran across that road, but I have been running ever since, fighting for criminal justice reform in this country. And I was so thankful that when I was released from prison, I was able to really fight and make a difference as I fought for criminal justice reform for the passage of the First Step Act, the one of the first criminal justice reform bills, really meaningful one in 30 years. Seeing my case, the president said that he wanted sentencing reform added to the First Step Act. He said he did not want anyone else to go through what I went through, to have such a hopeless situation. So the First Step Act the president signed it into law in December of 2018, just 6 months after my release.
That was such an exciting moment when the First Step Act was signed.
Yes.
And going off that, what do you think are some of the most important aspects of the law? I know you mentioned sentencing reform. Are there any others that you would like to discuss, or did you yourself make recommendations as the law was coming together?
Yes, as it was coming together, there were quite a few people working on different aspects of it. But one of the things that I really wanted to see happen in that was there had been the shackling of women during childbirth. One of my good friends, and who I call my daughter, Krista Munoz, I met her as a broken woman. She was shackled during childbirth. She just lost her son that was 5 years old right before she began her sentence. And she came in pregnant. It was a tragic accident at the daycare. She came in pregnant, and she already had a baby when she came to prison that was only 5 months old when she came in, but they shackled her during childbirth. And I'll never forget how traumatized she was by that. So I was very happy to see that her case was one of the cases that they used in showing examples of why women should not be shackled. So that was in the First Step Act. Another thing that I really wanted to see happen when I was first sentenced, I was sent 1,500 miles away from my children, and there was no way that they could come out that far and visit me. And they put in the First Step Act that no more than 500 miles to be incarcerated away from your families. But it really changed how prisons in the federal system, because it has so many rehabilitative pieces in there that help people prepare to come home. And it also gave more earned good time credits for people who were doing well in prison. So there were so many elements. It gave so much hope to so many people. And I truly was hoping. I know that the First Step Act, some have criticized that it didn't do everything, but it was just what it was, a first step. And I had so much confidence that there was going to be some other steps taken. Like, for instance, there is no parole in the federal system. And I never understood that parole was revoked a few decades ago, and in the federal system. And I just never understood what made a state prisoner worthy of parole, of redemption, and not a federal prisoner. So I would truly love to see parole reinstated again in the federal system.
That's a really fascinating point. Tonight, we have basically a pop-up State of the Union with President Biden, but we'd like to hear a little bit about your experience with the State of the Union in 2019 when you were honored by President Trump in the chamber itself, and then also hear a little bit when you went on to your speeches that you gave at CPAC and the RNC in 2020.
Okay. You have a clip now that you're going to show?
No. We were just saying we'd like to hear about what those experiences were like for you.
Oh, when I when I was the president's invited guest, that was really one of the greatest honors that I've received, to be recognized at the State of the Union address. It was a experience that I can't even put into words.
Mm-hmm.
The president, here I am, just not even a year. I had not even been free for a year, and to go from prison to be sitting in the hallowed halls, and for the president of the United States to be calling me, who they tried to characterize, I'm going to say, as terrible, and hearing the president say she's terrific. That was some kind of moment. I thought about it, really, as I was sitting there at the time that he asked me to stand up to be recognized. I looked down at my watch after I sat down, and that would have been about the same time that I would have been in a prison less than a year earlier, standing up for count. But instead, the president is asking me to stand up to receive unanimous applause from all over that those halls in those chambers, to receive unanimous applause. It just broke me. It had me overwhelmed with joy, overwhelmed with tears, just overwhelmed to see the president giving me such an honor. That's one of the highlights of my life, really.
I can't even imagine what it was like to stand there. And then to go on into the speeches that you gave at the RNC, how did that come about? Were you asked by the president himself or the team?
Well, actually, Jared is the one who made the call on behalf of the president and invited me to speak at the RNC. And that was also an honor to address millions of people, to have my voice heard, to not only to have my voice lifted up, but to lift up all of those who were incarcerated and had no voice, and to really speak of what the president had done in my life. Because sometimes, we're people are so busy looking at things that I'll say negative. And this is something I don't think that anyone reading my case and really looking at what the president saw would not agree that the president did a good thing. Everywhere I go, that is an overwhelming feeling, is that how happy people were that the president had compassion upon me and gave me my life back and gave me that second chance. And I say how ironic, I'm here tonight speaking during Second Chance Month, where so many others are so deserving of getting that same second chance that I received.
When you gave those speeches and you were appearing in so many people's homes across the United States, it's amazing. Did anyone ever make you feel like you had crossed some sort of ideological line by appearing at these Republican events, whether it's the National Convention for the GOP or CPAC even?
Well, for me, I've always been a person that I'm not moved by public opinion at all. Um, I don't care anything about council culture.
Right.
I feel like I was counsel for over 2 decades. No one even knew who I was. I don't care about the shares or the likes or the clicks. I don't care about any of those things. I'm a person that I do what I feel is the right thing to do. In my life, I have tried to please people before, and it had no good ending. So if you can't stand for what you believe in and what you feel strongly about, you will be just like someone who's moving with public opinion. I'll never be able to please everyone. I just have to do what I feel is the right thing to do. And I had no problem speaking there. And know if I had problems with people, within myself, trying to please people to do what they want me to do. When you do that, you're not free. I was set free from being under the control of prison guards, of a warden, and I'm not going to allow myself to be put back into prison by public opinion.
That's beautiful.
That's a great attitude to have, and good advice for everyone to think that way. And similarly, talking about President Trump and your work with the Trump administration, what did that entail in terms of advocating for commuted sentences and pardons of other prisoners? Can you tell us more about some of the cases that you brought to President Trump's attention as his term was ending?
Well, President Trump specifically said to me at Benedict's College when he received that award for the First Step Act, he said, Alice, I'm sure you know of a lot of other good people. You probably know some good people uh, who've been in prison that, basically I'm paraphrasing it, that deserve a second chance. And when he gave me that opportunity to raise those cases before him, I absolutely took him at his word, and he was true to his word, because after February of 2020, February of 2020, three of my close friends who I was incarcerated with, and the woman who I told you about, Krista Munoz, who was shackled, he gave these three mothers a second chance in life. And I started working, I got with other groups too. We started working diligently to identify people who had served time, who had rehabilitated, who were highly recommended, who posed no safety risk. This presented the cases to the president. He listened to me, but these cases were also very closely vetted. It was not just me saying, Mr. President, please let these people go. He still vetted these cases, but I had an opportunity to literally advance cases to White House counsel for them to take a look at and for them to advance them further to the president. And who would not, having been incarcerated themselves like me, not try to get as many good cases to the president as I possibly could? You know, to really even to have the respect of the president, where he didn't just say it, he actually he actually moved on it.
So going back to the question where we had left off previously, you were telling us about your work with President Trump on getting pardons and sentence commutations for other prisoners. And can you tell us more about your relationship with President Trump? Obviously, in the media, he's been portrayed in many ways, but it sounds like you might have seen a different side of him. So can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, I had the privilege of meeting with the president on numerous occasions in the Oval Office, where I discussed cases. And every time I met with the president, he was always very interested. He was always very interested in the person as an individual. And also, I don't know if you know, but I was on Air Force One with the president.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, in September, I went to the debate with him on Air Force One, and that was another privilege that I never in my life expected to have. And you know, the president is very approachable. President Trump, I guess I was privileged to know him and see him personally, and to talk with him, and to see his really care for the people that I discuss with him. I mean, I can't speak for anyone else. I really can't. The only thing that I can speak for is myself. And I had a very good relationship with the president. He took my ideas. He acted on many cases that I brought before him. And as I say, it wasn't just because I brought them. I brought him the best cases that I could. He would always have White House counsel vet those cases too. You know, I never felt that he didn't take everything that I said very seriously. And even though he was sitting in the highest office, literally in the world, especially in this nation, I, an ex prisoner, could sit before the President of the United States and have a dialogue and know that he was listening to me.
That's amazing. That's such a great story, and so great that you were able to be on Air Force One as well as honored at the State of the Union. Similarly, have you been in touch with the Biden administration on trying to continue the First Step Act or any other similar agenda items?
Well, I would like to continue working, uh, on these issues. But no, I have not been. I have not had that opportunity. I do continue to work with various organizations who are in touch, but on a personal level, I have not been in touch with the Biden administration.
So keeping on that theme, what criminal justice reforms do you think are most needed on the state and the federal level? Like you were saying before about parole on the federal level. What would you want more of on the state level, perhaps?
Well, I definitely would like them to take a look at the changes that were made in the First Step Act. As for an example, Arizona. Uh, Arizona has had a bill that has failed that would give prisoners, nonviolent prisoners, more earned good time credit, because that's something Arizona has not had a lot of criminal justice reforms in that state the way that Texas has. Not only has Texas led the way in making reforms, but they did it not at the risk of public safety. They've been able to close prisons down, and the crime rate has not gone up. So that should tell you something. They're being very smart on crime. Um, I'd like to see more advances on the state level, as I said, within the First Step Act, in preparing people to come home, that they would have more of a rehabilitative piece in criminal justice reform to when people come home, they have good opportunities to find jobs. There's a lot of work to be done in this space. There's many things that need to happen in terms of parole, literally parole reform also, I'll say that, in both the federal and in the state systems. Because for myself, I'd been in prison for almost 22 years with perfect conduct, posed no safety risk. I did not need that level of 5 years of probation. You're able to apply for probation to end after a year, but it's totally up to whether or not you'll be rejected. You know, the prosecutors may fight you, or the judge may not agree to it. You don't need to waste taxpayers' dollars on someone like myself. Thank God I received a full pardon. But other than that, I had 5 years of probation, even though I'd had almost 22 years of clear conduct, and I did not need that level of supervision. I was gainfully employed, and to have probation officers having to supervise people who don't need that level of supervision. So there has to be, I believe, changes in parole also. And people that have served long sentences, they really need to have some kind of way that you can look at that person's rehabilitation again. I know some states there's different ways that they do parole, but I'd like to see the use of clemency more too.
Mhm. Following up with that, are there any Republicans currently in office who have offered themselves as new partners for you in reform?
I'm sorry, what did you?
I was saying, are there any Republicans currently in office now who have basically offered themselves as new partners in criminal justice reform to partner?
Oh yes, oh yes, there are many of them. And even though I'm going to go back to Arizona again, I met with the Speaker of the House in Arizona, Speaker Bowers, and he's all in for it. There's many, even in Mississippi, where I've moved to now. I'm starting to see movement on criminal justice reform, and I think with this becoming something that Republicans are seeing as really something that their constituents want to see. This nation is in a place right now where there is a need. They want to see criminal justice reform. So this is also a conservative issue too. I mean, we are really and truly a country that believes in second chances and redemption and grace. And I think that the more voices like mine that are getting out, the more stories like mine that are getting out, we, yeah, I mean, they are really getting on board. I am starting to see a lot of movement with Republicans who are getting on board with criminal justice reform.
That's great, and we've been excited to see that too amongst people in the party.
Oh, yes.
Continuing on the theme of current events, what are your thoughts on the recent Derek Chauvin murder conviction for the death of George Floyd in terms of the criminal justice system?
Well, I know that all of the evidence that they had was presented. I didn't watch all of it, for me, but I believe in allowing justice to play out, and which we've got a system in place where a person is tried before a jury of their peers. And, I just don't feel that it's whatever was wrong or whatever needs to take place. I'm sure attorneys, I trust our system that we have in place, our system of going to trial and exercising your rights. So, for me, I tried to really stay out of that whole thing. I went to Minneapolis. I'm more concerned with healing that needs to take place between communities and police, because it really left a bad stain on police's ability, because we've got to come together. I was on the ground, I call it ground zero. I went to Minneapolis on a Heal America tour where I met with members of law enforcement, and members of the community, trying to be a bridge builder and healing, help bringing healing to that city. And that's really more of what I'm focused on, is where do we go from now as a nation? It is time for us to heal and not be divisive and come together.
And what are some of the steps that you've taken, or do you think that we need to take in the future to continue to promote the healing?
Well, it's very important that we have more community policing. I remember when I was growing up, the police that we saw were part of our communities. And I think that is a key element of bringing trust back. When you have police in communities who know the people, and you know the families, you know who you are serving there, because that's who police are. They're public servants. Their jobs are to serve and to protect, and we've got to get that level back on both sides, because it is beneficial for our communities. I mean, you want to have police in your communities. If you don't have, I mean, we'd like to think that we can police ourselves, but police are there. I've got many police officers in my own personal family. And so I'm not anti-police. And I just believe that we got to get to a place of trust again. And there, in anything that you have, there's going to be some bad actors. But I don't believe in labeling people. I've had a label put on me. And so I don't label people. I take you at your face as I meet you. When I meet a person, I meet them as they are in that moment, because people do change. But I don't believe in broadly labeling all people like I was labeled and like ex offenders are labeled.
Mhm.
And I'm sure police don't want to be labeled like that either.
What is the most important takeaway that you would like to share from your book, Afterlife: My Journey from Incarceration to Freedom?
I think the most important takeaway for me is to never give up hope. Sometimes we put our hope in the wrong thing, but really, as a believer, my hope and my faith is in God. And no matter how dark it is, that you have to be able to see beyond the darkness. You have to be able to not follow the negativity, and look for what you can find that is good. In whatever situation you find yourself in, that something good can come out of it.
Mhm.
It's all dependent upon what we make of it. There's a poem. I don't even know who wrote it, but it's just a saying. Two prisoners looked out of prison bars. One saw mud and the other saw stars. I choose to see stars.
Well said.
And continuing on that theme, in your opinion, what are some of the most important ways to reintegrate former prisoners into society in terms of while they're still in prison, as well as once they're back in the community?
Well, while they're still in prison, there's some things that need to take place. We've got to have training tools in prison. They've got GED and things like that, but there's got to be more things that when a person is in prison, that they can train to get jobs when they come out of prison. When I came out, I'd taken many classes, including electrical classes. I had to challenge myself when I realized that there were very few, that was a good place for a woman to work. Even though I had a life sentence, I started preparing myself for life outside of prison. But when I did come out, it was one thing, that a big roadblock that I ran into, and that was getting identification. I came out, I got sick 2 weeks after. I ran up a hospital bill that I could even pay because I got really sick. And we just have to have things prepared for those returning citizens to be a success. And really, it falls upon us as a community too. That stigma of being an ex-felon, sometimes it carry on and on and on, And we also, as a faith community, the church is very important in helping returning citizens reintegrate, because you do feel many of them feel isolated, they feel shunned by society, and to give a person who's already paid their debt to society, all many of them want is just a second chance. They paid their debt, and it's time for them to start their lives so that they can be productive in their communities again. So it's also very important for communities to to help with reintegration back into society, those who have been gone and are now returning citizens, because that's who they are. They're your neighbors. They may be the person sitting on the pew beside you at church. Their children are going to be in school with your children, and it's to our benefit to hope that they have the best success, and if we can help them be successful, it's beneficial to our communities. It just
Alice,
really comes down to grace, extending grace.
can you tell us a little more about your organization, Taking Action for Good, and how we could get involved with it?
Yes, you can go to takingactionforgood.org. Uh, I love for people to come alongside me in the work that I'm doing. The work that I'm doing right now is I'm focused a lot on clemencies and pardons. I do storytelling because it was my story that really touched the hearts and caused people to rise up and say we need criminal justice reform on a united front. They saw the need for it. My face literally became the face of the need for criminal justice reform. But also, something else I'm focusing on is prosecutorial reform. And that don't mean prosecutors. That means from the time of arrest. And there are so many laws and things on the books that give people give them criminal records. And so there needs to be some type of prosecutorial reforms that take place. And I was working really hard and heavily on reentry, but I'm really focusing on more on the storytelling aspect because I'm of people that are taking action for good too. I want to be able to go alongside organizations. I don't have to do the same thing. The thing that I do is unique, and the platform that I have is unique to any other platform, but I'm not trying to recreate the wheel. There are organizations that are out there that are doing excellent work. I'd like to come alongside them to be able to bring my element of storytelling to the table to uplift those cases and those faces.
Well, Alice, thank you so much for joining us tonight, especially for Second Chance Month, for explaining your story and talking about what the needed reforms are in our country. You have many fans at this club, and we would love to see you in person when you're in New York.
Oh, I would love to see you too. New York was one of the last places that I went before the pandemic. I was on Dr. Oz. And so I'm looking forward to going back. I didn't know that I would be gone from New York this long. So thank you so much. And I would love to meet all of you in person too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good night from New York.
Okay, good night.